Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace to everyone once again. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second roundtable in DinarStandard, OIC Economic Outlook Series, US-Israel-Iran Regional Crisis 2026, Food Sector Focus. My name is Iman Ali, consultant at DinarStandard, and I have the pleasure to serve you as the MC today. We are meeting at a moment when the geopolitical situation continues to evolve rapidly, and food security across OIC economies is squarely in the crosshairs. Today's session builds on our first brief from April, going deeper into the food and agriculture cluster. A quick note before we begin. The interactive dashboard for this brief is live, and the link will be shared with you shortly. You can also scan the barcode on the screen, as you can see on the screen. And of course, I encourage you to have it open as we walk through our findings today. Here is our agenda for today. We will open with the series recap and pulse check from our CEO, Rafi-uddin Shikoh, followed by a deep dive into the food and agriculture findings from our consulting manager, Ibrahim Vahed. We will also move into our panel discussion and a Q&A session, and finally close with some final thoughts. Please also be reminded that questions are welcome throughout, so please drop them in the Zoom Q&A box at any time, and we'll get to them at the end. So without a further delay, it is my pleasure to invite our CEO and Managing Partner, Rafi-uddin Shikoh, and Ibrahim Vahed, Consulting Manager at DinarStandard, to take us through the series context and food and agriculture deep dive. Brother Ibrahim, over to you. Brother Rafi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. Peace and greetings upon all of you. As Iman mentioned, we are honored to be having this very important discussion. I'm really particularly grateful for our esteemed panelists who you will hear from in a little while. And I'm really also honored that you are all spending a little bit of time as we get into Eid season to discuss this important topic. This series or this brief focus today is part of our ongoing monthly series that we have embarked on, covering the critical implication of this Israel-US-Iran war and the wider regional crisis with the Gaza genocide and its incredible implications on the economies of the region. Our scope of work is focused on the 57 OIC member countries. So the first session we did last month covered the overview across all major 11 OIC industry clusters. And we presented the different current state of those major industry sectors, the crisis impact across all of them at a high level, and we discussed the implications, in particular medium-term and long-term implications of the crisis and some of the strategic options. Today, inshallah, we're going to present to you a deep dive focus on food and agriculture in particular, which is the one of the major, most affected sectors, and obviously has significant impacts on the socio-economic situation across the OIC markets and globally as well. So to start with a recap before we go into the food and agriculture analysis, I'll give you a quick 2-minute recap of what we covered in the overarching session, which will set a good context into the deep dive, which my colleague Ibrahim will then, inshallah, dive into. So the focus of this impact brief has been, we wanted to answer the key question of what are the medium and long-term strategic options for OIC economies in response to this crisis. Our focus here is not the immediate response, the crisis immediate response, but the strategic thinking around what medium and long-term our stakeholders in the region have to think about, which maybe they don't have the time right now to think about, and we're spending some time, have spent some time on doing that. So that's the objective. Now, if we go to our assessment of the scenarios that we are dealt with today. The way our team has looked at the crisis is to evaluate potential scenarios. As we all know, the situation is still fluid. However, we identified four overarching scenarios. Number one is the ceasefire normal scenario. Number two was if there is a civil unrest in Iran. Number three was a protracted war, and a protracted war with civil unrest. And that last one has the highest disruption, the highest severest disruption. The scenario that we see ourselves, and we are doing this analysis, is based on the new normal and assuming some level of a ceasefire or a complete halt to the current war. We do expect that regardless of the war ending or at least ceasing for a period, that we will be faced with a new normal of economic reality, political reality, and as such will affect, in particular, the food and agriculture session as well. So with that, let me just give a quick high-level summary. As I mentioned, we looked at the 57 OIC countries. We identified 11 industry clusters, starting with energy, food and agriculture was the second big one, tourism sector, other sectors such as financial services, and so on. There were 11 sectors, technology, and so forth, of which food was one of the major ones besides energy that was highlighted. As you can see here, $9.2 trillion in OIC GDP, of which 786 is represented by the is the value of the GDP that was at risk, and 62 billion of that is food and agriculture related as a contribution to GDP. We also know that the OIC countries have a 110 billion import gap, which is sort of the deficit in terms of the food one. So this is sort of a high-level summary per region. As you can see that we highlighted, GCC is obviously where the core, the most critical impact is, but also West Asia, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa have high, and Southeast Asian OIC countries, Central Asian countries also have medium implications. And you can see within the food and agriculture here, what is the implication. We have on the dashboard in terms of the existing impact of the crisis. As you all know, the whole conversation or the reality that we're seeing is impacted by the critical maritime choke points, which is first of all Strait of Hormuz, but also Bab el-Mandeb. And you can see here, related to OIC countries, other points of potential choke points, Suez Canal, Strait of Malacca, and even the Turkish Straits are all points that within OIC countries are areas that would be considered choke points at different levels. So with that, just to kind of summarize that in our overarching overview of OIC countries in the last edition, we identified six key six themes of strategic positioning for OIC countries. And these themes are energy transition and sovereignty, food and agricultural sovereignty, intra-OIC trade acceleration, tech sovereignty and AI readiness, Islamic finance infrastructure, and halal economy build-out. And as you can see, 4 of those 6 themes are related or are relevant to the food industry. Again, you will be able to refer to the full briefing on our dashboard. But at this time, let's jump into the food and agriculture sector, for which, inshallah, Ibrahim, if you can come on and join in, please.
Thank you, Brother Rafi-uddin. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Vahed, Consulting Manager at DinarStandard. And today I'm going to take you deeper into the food cluster. And as you've seen, it is the largest non-energy cluster in the OIC economy. I'm going to cover 3 things today, which is the sector profile, how the crisis has hit the sector, and the strategic options on the table. First, we will start with, I want to go over to our dashboard. And our interactive dashboard, as you've seen, we are able to track each of these clusters individually, and within the cluster, we've then broken it down into subsectors. So the first, so when you break down agriculture, food and agriculture, we've tracked a total of 23 subcategories, and this is at a 2-digit HS code level. And you can see these are the HS codes and the sectors when it comes to imports to OIC countries. So just to highlight a few, you can see here that the biggest category is cereals, which accounts for around 54 billion, and this is in terms of imports to OIC countries. The second biggest is animal, vegetable fats and oils at 26 billion, and the third is sugar and sugar confectionery at around 22 billion. In terms of the color coding, you can see here purple corresponds to raw or sort of mostly upstream. Teal is semi-processed and orange is processed. So again, you can see most of these products are really sort of unfinished or raw products. As I go through this presentation, I'd like to just welcome your input. Feel free to use the comments box. Which categories do you feel shouldn't be so high up in terms of imports, where countries should really be producing these, on their own? We'd welcome your comments. But I wanted now expand on who are these countries that are importing and who are the major exporters. So in terms of import, you can see that the major countries are Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Malaysia, UAE, Turkey, etc. And then when we look at the major exporters, these are largely non-OIC countries, right? Which is Brazil, India, Russia, the UAE as an export hub, re-export hub does show up high on this list. But there are a few important points that I'd like to raise here. Number one, OIC countries imported in total around 300 billion in 2024, which is around 18% of global food trade. Intra-OIC, so this is OIC to OIC country trade, is around 83 billion, which is 23%. So there's around 28%. So there's around 28% OIC self-sufficiency. The remaining 72% are coming from from non-OIC countries. The last point I'd like to make here is if you look at the top three exporters, right, which is Brazil, India, Russia, all three of them depend on seaborne self-fertilizer for most of their imports, right? And so you can understand that the exposure to OIC countries are twofold. So one is there's a direct sort of impact when it comes to logistical disruptions as a result of the crisis, but we are also seeing that the food that OIC imports and the imports are also being affected further upstream, right? And I want to expand a bit on this sort of this two-channel impact, which we will refer to as direct and domino, right? So direct impact, as you can see, it's really this is the stuff that's making the headlines, right? We've heard about, if, for example, Iranian pistachios. These are products that, directly as a result of the conflict, they're unable to, and supply has been impacted. However, there's a second category, which is the domino impact, which is far more devastating. And these are affecting, will eventually affect products such as cereals, oil, meat, and it often disproportionately affects those who are most vulnerable. So domino impacts are really upstream, and more often than not, it's around fuel and fertilizer. And it's the fuel and fertilizer that is needed even before growing happens. We're talking about sulfur, urea, ammonia, and phosphate. This, given the fact that it's coupled to crop cycles, the impacts can be months and it can go all the way up to 2029. Now, I want to illustrate this, just with some very real examples here, right? So, we know that roughly a third of seaborne or world traded fertilizer goes through or used to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And urea, which is most widely used nitrogen fertilizer on Earth, is one of those chemicals. Now, when the strait was closed, urea prices jumped to their highest level since 2022. It's up around 70% earlier this year. So fertilizer plants across, for example, Southeast Asia and Gulf were essentially idling. And here, this is where matters gets worse. When impact of fertilizer, when supply of fertilizer is impacted, countries will activate certain emergency policies, right? And this is around protecting their own interests, whether it's subsidies or it's a control of exports. These tend to have the largest impact on pricing, right? So if you look at the supply of Gulf fertilizer, the domino effect means that plants in India and Pakistan will be idle, which means that the Kharif season, which is essentially the main summer crop, the yields will be impacted. If the yields are impacted, the subsequent impact is that less is exported, and less being exported means higher prices and competition. And we expect that that translation of prices to cereals to OIC countries will be seen around like sort of the second quarter of 2027. And that's for cereals and grains, right? Which, as you've seen, is one of the highest categories. If I look at another categories, which is feed, which ultimately impacts food, which is meat, sulfur is actually a major input in the production of phosphor, right? So you have one chemical which is then a requirement for another fertilizer, which is phosphor. So even though Morocco, which is a phosphor producer, is geographically quite far away from the strait, that fertilizer is now impacted, which then in turn impacts soybean, right, which is one of the key ingredients for animal feed, which will then impact meat, right? So this is an example of how this domino effect it cascades throughout, and we might not see, these may not make the headlines initially, but we are likely going to see the impacts of this between sort of 8 months to even a year from now. So what we've done is we've mapped, so from those 23 categories that you've seen, we then took and we ranked them in terms of exposure into direct and exposure sort of domino. And now I've just given you an illustration of 15 such categories. And you can see, you'll see that a sort of acute, and we've categorized them into, so there's 4 sort of tiers, 4 categories. Acute, which is red, which is impacted by both direct and domino. And then you have, other tiers which are more sort of further down the line. And you're seeing that, for example, cereals, meat, animal feed, and even live animals as well, right? So we are going to see this sort of staggered impact depending on the category and the exposure. We then took just from those 15, let's just pick 5 of the top food categories, and we wanted to know which regions were mostly impacted, right? Across all 5, the same regional names anchor the ranking. So if you see, the Gulf, or GCC and broader West Asia bloc, it's a recurring throughout. Now, obviously, this is whilst this is a cause for concern, there is a flip side to this, right? Which we will also capture in terms of our strategic recommendations. But this exposure being concentrated in a handful of blocks also means that coordinated moves amongst that handful of blocks could shift the picture for the whole group, right? So this is something that if these blocks act as a collective, they can make substantial changes to the situation. So we've like Brother Rafi-uddin mentioned, our focus is really around medium to long term strategic options, right? And so to do that, what we've developed is 8 strategic options. These strategic options were determined by looking at what are the 4 areas of vulnerability, which is direct supply blockage, input dependence, producer country exposure, and self-supply gap, which we know there's a considerable self-supply gap. We then identified 4 direct levers. So these are the strategic levers, which is sovereignty, sourcing, innovation, and architecture. And from these, we've derived 8 of the strategic objectives, which I'd like to go through, right? I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on each of these. So when it comes to the first option, which is food sovereignty hubs, this is about holding more supply within regions or blocks rather than buying on a day-to-day basis from outside. In the medium term, this is about building regional or block level grain reserves or for any other categories. But on the long term, we want to connect those reserves into a single OIC sovereignty network. Second is fertilizer and input independence. As you can see, the world depends on a very narrow set of fertilizer suppliers, and the OIC sits inside that risk. So medium term, capture more input value add within the block. Long term, move the OIC towards self-sufficiency in critical input. Third is nearshoring and alternative sourcing. The focus here is on reducing exposure to choke points, right? And Brother Rafi-uddin covered that it's more than just the Strait of Hormuz. There are multiple other choke points. In the medium term, substitute choke point exposed flows with alternatives, and long term is building permanent corridor infrastructure. Fourth is intra-OIC corridor activation, which is doing more food trade between OIC members instead of importing outside the bloc. Fifth is food tech and agri-tech build out. And this is about producing more food on the same land in places often that, historically could not grow. In a medium term, we suggest scaling up with tech infrastructure and producer education or grower education. And in the long term, it's about scaling precision agriculture, aggregating small-scale growers and the like. Sixth is yield recovery for producers. OIC food security depends on a small set of external producer blocks. So investing in their productivity is critical. Seventh is halal certification harmonization, right? And I know this might not seem initially like it's going like it would stimulate trade, but our analysis shows that this is often overlooked, and it is an accelerant to trade. In the long term, we should look to cut certification costs by around 30 to 50%. And finally, agri-finance and brands. I cannot stress the impacts of these two. So agri-finance, it's all about funding resilience at scale, but building homegrown OIC food brands instead of importing branded products, from into the market. And we believe that in the medium term, it's about standing up that agri-resilience facility and effectively an OIC owned food brand accelerator. But in the long term, it's about getting to a point where we establish a multilateral food security fund, like we've seen offered in the past, and double the OIC brand share in OIC retail. Now, every region will have different levers at their disposal, right? So we don't recommend that every region pull the same levers or all levers, right? That's not what we recommend. In fact, there are 2 dimensions that we should focus on. The first is the area of focus is it's not just the option, but it's also in terms of which specific food categories. So not all food categories for all regions. That's the first dimension. The second dimension is sequencing. So I'll talk first about the first dimension. Like I said, it's not about running all 8 options together. Leverage existing plays that have already been made. For example, in the Gulf, that's the clearest example. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have already moved hard on alternative sourcing. and reducing asset exposure. So when you look at the Gulf when you look at this Gulf row, the differentiators are capital depth, food tech infrastructure. And so we don't have a very high nearshoring focus, but we do say a focus on agri-finance brand, food tech, and agri-tech build out. Then if we look at, and the next point I'd like to raise is around sequencing, right? I think it's critical that, and it goes back to our earlier point, that all of these should be ultimately coordinated, at least within the same block. At minimum, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where, again, like I mentioned, policies and emergency policies are one of the highest drivers of cost. And so it's critical that at a minimum, there's coordination at a regional or block level. Ideally, at an OIC level, there should be coordination on this. So this will be attached to our dashboard. The QR code can be used to download the report as well as access the dashboard if you'd like to see more information on this. I will now hand over back to Brother Rafi-uddin to take us through some of the DS offerings and how we can help.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Everyone, again, thank you for listening through our analysis. We welcome your questions on this analysis, and I'm really excited to introduce a very good mix of panelists we have. We also have within the attendees some really well-recognized and respected food ecosystem stakeholders. So welcome and thank you for joining. Please do drop your question. We hope to make this really a dialogue. The Q&A part will start as soon as we start the panel discussion. I wanted to share that some of the work we are doing in support beyond publishing these analyses is to provide advisory to various stakeholders on the vulnerability assessment and strategic planning in particular, where we're looking at specific for each market, for each stakeholder, supply chain vulnerability diagnostics, the opportunity of halal economy enabler, Islamic finance enablement to support the strategic options, and then various aspects of scenario planning, both mid and long term. We also have two interactive tools that are coming online. This dashboard you're seeing is a preview of that product, which is our Impact Intel, which is our proprietary data intelligence platform, as well as we are building a signal sensing tool that we're already providing to various government agencies in the MENA region in particular. So with that, allow me to introduce our panelists and invite them to join us. Sorry, before that, actually, just wanted to share these are our key senior partners or partners on the DinarStandard team, whom you can reach out to, including myself directly, in terms of that support that we could provide your organizations or other stakeholders. Okay, now with that, let us dive into a panel discussion. I'd like to invite our panelists to please join, and we will, inshallah, start the panel chat. So I will be joined, first of all, by seasoned industry experts from particularly the MENA or GCC region, but really with a global experience, Mr. Shahid Khan. Welcome, Mr. Shahid. I believe you're joining us from Dubai today. That's right. Okay. And then we have Ibrahim Abed, who is the head of operations, chief operating officer of Crescent Foods in the United States, one of the most recognized halal food brands. Welcome, Ibrahim. Thank you, and good to have you on as well. We will also be joined in a bit. She's running a little late. Ms. Rosi Osman, who is a halal industry strategist based out of Malaysia. And so, inshallah, we'll have three different geographic perspectives. I wanted to welcome both of you first until we wait for Sister Rosi to join. A brief introduction for those of you who don't know Mr. Shahid Khan. He is currently the CEO and advisor at SNK Advisory Services. based in UAE. You are a seasoned, mashallah. I've known you since the early days at IFCO and some of the great brands you've built, London Dairy and many others, as well as your role as CEO at Al Islami Food, which is a pioneer in the halal food space. And we've been covering Al Islami and many of the other roles. You began your career at Unilever as a vice president, and now you're providing the advisory to many of the organizations and GCC in particular. So welcome, Mr. Shahid. Let me start with you. I just wanted a quick 2 minute, just so we can have a mix between yourself and Ibrahim, and inshallah, Sister Rosi will join. Your quick reaction to the analysis that Ibrahim presented on the food and agriculture impact across the OIC. And I know you have a very focused view on GCC, but the supply chain is a global supply chain, so it really is a global story, as well as the regional one across OIC. So let's start with a couple of minutes of your quick reaction to the analysis that you heard.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and share my thoughts with everyone. As you recall from our previous meetings, I'm a very straightforward guy, so I don't mince my words. I like to be very to the point and very direct. So I just like to mention that as an Islamic ummah, if you were to do a rating test of OIC, it would not rank very highly at the moment. We feel that OIC is very inactive, very dormant. It might be working behind the scenes, but this was the time that we expected around the world for OIC to be taking more meaningful platforms and positions, not only for food, but geopolitical as well and economic. So there is a big credibility gap on OIC as such. And I want to be very honest and open, as I said. We can all make nice speeches and do a lot of praising, but I think that is a fundamental issue because for OIC to even take a leading role, it needs to build a proactive position in the Committee of Nations, especially in the Muslim Ummah. That's my first overall observation. I hope you don't mind it. I know you're presenting.
Thank you for setting that important context because, Mr. Shahid, as you mentioned, and our work for the last 15 years, which has been focused significantly on OIC markets, is to less worry about the organization of OIC as such, but identify how the linkages are happening within OIC member countries to enable this, you could say, the camaraderie and opportunity of the Ummah enablement. And we see, and I'm sure you've seen, for example, collaborations with Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, or Turkey, or Egypt, etc., or Pakistan, and so forth. So there is an halal food and Islamic finance is playing a role in it. But I think your point, well taken. I think that frustration is valid, especially on the political front. And that manifests in terms of economic collaboration and the intent of increasing intra-OIC investments and trade.
I made that point, and you have accepted it broadly. Now I can talk about more particular business aspects of OIC and the collaborations. So, we've gone through COVID. We've seen what all happens when there is a big, major disruption. A lot of companies were taken aback. A lot of countries were taken aback. And, there was a real crisis globally on shipments, on food stuff, and food being the most important element of anything else. You can live without most of the things, but food and water is something that you cannot afford to be, out of. So this was a major issue when I took over as the CEO of Al Islami in 2020, January. And a week later, COVID started. And people thought I was crazy, but because I ordered 6 months of stock from Brazil, and you never do that with frozen chicken because it has a very short life. By the time it reaches you, 3 months are already gone. So you're left with 9 months of valid shelf life to sell the products. But I took a major, major risk of bringing in 6 months of stock for Al Islami, this historic highest, and actually hired spaces to store it. And then I soon realized that even companies like BRF and, Sierra, both of them decided to pack up and closed offices. So there was actually nobody selling chicken. We were the only guys who had the stock, and that's why we had 50 years highest sales and highest profits in 2020, which had never happened in Al-Islami. So sometimes you have to take those risks when you can see. I mean, that's what CEOs do. They take a risk, calculated risk, but they safeguard against such calamities. Then immediately the governments rose up in Bahrain and UAE, and they started reaching me, and they said, "You got too much stock. We want to keep some cover for our people." So that's how we started looking at Aktia and all these big institutions to build and advise them on how to build stock in such a way where you don't sit on near expiry stuff, but you always safe rather than sorry for shortcomings. Like, I mean, these are top commodities: rice, flour, chicken, water. These things you cannot run out of. You might not have 10 flavors of jams available during crisis, but even people you could do without jams, or spreads, but you need butter, for example. You need chicken, you need rice, commodities as opposed to. So this was a big learning for us. And I think all the people in the food industry around the world know what all happened during that period. So this is not different. This is not different. Here I see an opportunity, actually. So there is a learning on that available in our notebooks. If you study the 2020, 21 in any company, you will see what's wrong things or right things they did, which managed them to stay afloat. The second point I want to raise is, when you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, food, shelter, and safety in that order is the most important thing a human needs. Okay, whether you live in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, or in opulent countries, it's the same thing. These are something that you cannot live without. So I think a lot of it has to be governed by governments and their strategies, because individual companies, of course, have their own strategies, but they should all kind of mesh with governmental or even better, regional or even better OIC level kind of collaboration. See, what happens is, if I am a grower and I come from a farming background from Pakistan, from Islamabad, so I understand a little bit about farming cycles and the issues of farmers and stuff like that. The moment international prices go up because of any war or any other disruption, the local guys are trying very hard to export. So what they end up doing is to create shortages in their own countries. So for example, if there's a war in Afghanistan, all the wheat flour, which is meant for the very large country called Pakistan, 250 million people, gets siphoned off and you sell at much higher rate in Afghanistan. And businessmen being businessmen, if they get more money somewhere else, they would export it. Same thing happens with rice, same thing happens with mangoes in the season, stuff like that. So the point I'm trying to make is, all this can only be controlled by the governments. You cannot leave it to individual operators, right? So you need to have a broad OIC level roadmap, because as the 57 countries are divided, if I can broadly categorize them, they're like 15 or 20 which are oil rich and oil producing, but none of them produce food.
Right.
And then there are another 35 or so who don't have oil, but they have water. So it's either water or oil. You can literally divide OIC with water rich and oil rich countries. The oil rich countries don't have water, and the water rich countries don't have oil. But agriculture, of course, grows where there is water. So it is naturally divided in such a way. So you have to really plan and chalk out an OIC level strategy where you need to look at the total picture, where you need the governments to participate. That's why I started by saying OIC needs to play a role. If it works as a functional group, then it can create legislation where such controls can be put in place. Otherwise, the economics of it, the profiteering of it, is going to disrupt whatever we're going to propose.
Right. So, Mr. Shahid, thank you so much. I think there's a lot you covered, and I think one of the initial headlines I'll take from you is that the experience of COVID is relevant here. I think that was one of the things you led with, which is that experience definitely, you can see the crisis response from GCC and other markets had that experience wrapped in it because of what COVID challenged us with. I want to next go to Ibrahim because Ibrahim, the U.S., which is where you're based at, is the number 5 top exporter of food products to the OIC member countries. And we know that, in fact, not just number 5, if we look at the top 5, as you saw from Ibrahim's presentation, from the top 5, Brazil, France, a lot of the Western markets are, in fact, the major exporters. So in this value chain, Mr. Shahid, of the crisis of food dependency, and as you said, all of the implications, the major suppliers, such as the U.S., have an significant impact as well. So Ibrahim, first, I know we're going to talk about Crescent in particular next, but I'd like to get your perspective at a U.S. level first. If you can just share with us, how do you see, I know Crescent is now also involved internationally. I know, mashallah, of the great success you have as a halal food major player nationally in the US, which is an incredible success story itself. But what are you hearing and seeing vis-a-vis this crisis to the US's exports to OIC countries?
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum.
We can hear you.
Is there an echo or?
There is a little echo.
All right. Okay, I'll start off. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor. From the US's perspective, certainly there is a significant number of, especially meat products, that is exported to the OIC. And it's been, I would say, a blessing and a curse at the same time, depending on which protein you look at. For instance, on the beef side, in the US, there's a significant domestic shortage on livestock, which has increased prices drastically. So therefore, the significant reduction of exports has actually helped the US domestic market on supplies and availability, and slowed down the increase in prices domestically in the US. Now, on the flip side, if you look at chicken and poultry in general, where there is major export into the OIC countries, there has been a domestic effect as well to that, because there are certain parts, specifically like dark meat, that gets exported to the entire Middle East, and it helps really offset some of the domestic prices in the US on some of the other parts. But that we've seen those costs go up because now those have to be rerouted to South America and to other places because of that reduction. The other piece as well is just logistics. The increased exposure and insurance and costs and freight has really, made certain companies think. Maybe large companies like Tyson or JBS, they can kind of handle those things because they have more governmental relations. But other smaller players are afraid to export product, get anything on the waters because of boats being stuck and just the overall increase in costs. So there has been certainly some domestic effect in the US market based off of that. But everybody, the last time I remember you had a panel, there wasn't a ceasefire. So alhamdulillah, we have a ceasefire, but now we need the strait to open up to kind of increase that flow. So overall, there is hope, but it certainly created some short-term, highs and lows in terms of a lot of the major commodities.
Great. I will come back to you, Mr. Shahid, in terms of how Ibrahim's response relates to obviously the supply chain being disrupted from a sourcing point of view, and from the core region, which is Strait and Hormuz affected GCC market where you're sitting. Obviously, looking at alternative suppliers, how is the relationship with sourcing with the US? But I'll come back to that. I want to first have Sister Rosi Osman also do some introductory comments. Sister Rosi, you're based in Malaysia. Mashallah, you are You are a principal, you're a halal industry, principal and partner of your consultancy. You're a halal industry strategist. You are a pioneer member of Malaysia's Halal Professional Board, which was established under JAKIM, which is the halal standards body of Malaysia. You've been also working with on halal standards for pharmaceutical chemicals, and later developed the world's first halal standard for medical devices. In context of your understanding of how, it's speaking from Malaysia, Southeast Asia, how is at the macro level, first of all, the crisis affecting the food ecosystem for Malaysia?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Brother Rafi and DinarStandard, for this opportunity to share my thoughts. I was late coming in because it was Maghrib in Malaysia during the time when you started. So I missed the presentation, but from the gist of your the discussion, I can have some glimpse of it. And also Sister Zainab had shared with me the PowerPoint. But I would feel that, inshallah, I come into this conversation as someone with a 40 years journey set between accountancy, halal governance, and ecosystem building, actually. So I tend to look at this issue we're discussing today to the risk and trust perspective. The accountant in me looks at exposure, cost, and continuity. I haven't forgot my 20 years in finance. While the halal ecosystem and steward in me look at assurance, amanah, and resilience, right? So all in all, my second half of the journey until now, halal is my intrinsic lens. Okay, so not only in the sense of certification, but in the deeper sense of amanah. So how we design systems so that people, business, and consumer can continue to trust what reaches the market regardless of the situation. All right. So I will frame my response through 4 simple words: availability, affordability, assurance, and most importantly, amanah. Okay. So the issue is not only whether food can still move, but whether trust can continue moving in it. Right. So I won't delve much into what Malaysia is doing or what other countries are doing, because I think there are similar approaches, right? I see Malaysia's current exposure is that less of immediate shortage, but more of cost corridor and confidence pressure, through fuel, fertilizers, feed, freight, insurance, and supplier confidence. So other countries will also diversify suppliers and build reserves, right? But Malaysia difference is that we can help make halal trust operational, inshallah, through the existing standards, our 50 years plus experience in certification, the trust that we've built. Currently, Malaysia has built the My Halal ingredient system that helps to build the database on ingredients through the help of all the halal certification bodies and halal authorities. Their database hopefully combines and then come up with it. Because I think the database of halal ingredients is quite important, right? So the thing is that we should look at all this in perspective of what the Quran says also. Brother Shahid, I commend you. Though you said you only have a stock of 6 months, not like what Prophet Yusuf did of 7 years, but you did do that. Alhamdulillah. And I think that's what we should be doing. Look back to the Quran and see what's there. That Allah has already, stated in the Quran what we can do in terms of this crisis. Like in Ma'idah, verse 2, coincidence is talking about the Hajj that we are talking now, and that what we are experiencing now tomorrow is Arafah. And Allah has said that during the rites, do not transgress, but the moment that you come out of Ihram, do not let the hatred of people for having obstructed you from Masjid Haram lead you to transgress, and cooperate in righteousness and piety, but do not cooperate in sins and aggression. Fear Allah, indeed Allah is severe in penalty. So it goes back to what Brother Shahid was talking about, OIC's collaboration. So I mean, it's good that Brother Rafi does this. It's just few days before Hajj. That tomorrow is Arafah, and we can pray together tomorrow, even though we are not there, so that what Allah said in Ma'idah 2 can happen within the OIC level, because it is not just we have to look at the COVID-19 issue about the supply chain disruption, the movement. So Brother Ibrahim is just talking about the US and then exporting out. But if there's a cut, we're only looking at the Hormuz canal. But what if the other canals get disrupted? And that's a bigger issue. So even within OIC, the movement within OIC also can be affected. So these are things that we should be looking into also, I would say.
Jazakallah for the beautiful reminders. And indeed, our work as DinarStandard has always, the intention of it has always been from the beginning in the unity of this global Muslim community and the good and khair it can bring to the world. And indeed, the day before Arafah, it's a important reminder as we go into it that we pray. Ultimately, we can try and we can plan and we can be strategic, but the ultimate help comes from our Creator, and we have that opportunity. And great reference and example to Hazrat Yusuf's story in context of food crisis, so to say, food security. What a great reminder as well. So with that, Brother Shahid, what's your thoughts on, let's put it, both in context of Sister Rosi and Brother Ibrahim's comments.
Sure. I just want to add one more thing to Madam Sister Rosi. It reminds me always our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his last speech in the Arafah day, and he said, "Hang on to the rope of Allah. And after I'm gone, because I might not be there for the next Hajj, but when I'm gone, do not separate into groups. Get united. And I have a fear that, the Muslims will break up into smaller factions and groups." I'm not using the exact words. My memory is not that great, but this was the essence of his thoughts. And within a matter of a few years, we all broke up in groups. I don't want to go in that direction. But I'm saying every crisis is supposed to unify people. Every crisis. I mean, if there is a war, I mean, our country has gone through wars, so we know what it is like to be in a country which has faced war. People who were at each other's throats, politically became one. They became all united for a common cause. So I think this is what OIC's role is, that the Muslim Ummah should be commonly united to face not only this adversity, which is about food, which is a very important aspect of it. But I think every crisis, every friction, every problem gives you an opportunity to unite if there is the right leadership and the right messaging. So I think this is a great opportunity for OIC. And Rafi bhai, I don't know many people in that, what you call it, the government sector. But I think this kind of message should go from your good offices, that this is a great opportunity, not politically, but of unification, on teaming up together and not break up into factions and countries and people and places as a Muslim Ummah. What can we do? Underpinned by what Sister said about halal and about the faith, all these things are linked together. And according to Maslow, which I was mentioning before you joined, it's the basic need of humans to live in societies and to have food. It's a very basic need. Whether you are in Africa or you are in a rich country like US or Dubai or anywhere, food is very, very important. So I think this messaging should go to unify OIC and actually act them on to create these forums in such a way where the governments are forced to participate as one body, not as countries, but as one Muslim body to say, okay, how do we join hands together? How do we make sure the right products reach the right countries, whether they can afford it, are they growing it? If not growing it, they're all networked. And by the way, what we are talking about, the only new things that happened was the airlines last 200 years ago. Everything else is very traditional. Our own Holy Prophet used to take from Makkah and Medina all the way to Syria on camelbacks, right? So this food supply chain is not new. It's very, very, very old. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, even if we follow our own religion and learn from all this was done before. We don't have to do something new. Ships were running for thousands of years, right? So all we have to do is to collaborate. I think what is missing is the collaboration part. Everybody is in his own little world, trying to fix his own problems without talking to his brother Muslims. So I think that was the key thing. I keep coming back to it, but that would.
So let me pick up on this because we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to kind of see a few more points get to be taken in, and we have a couple of questions as well. I think the spirit of the conversation here is one of anchoring ourselves in the spiritual aspect of our deen and how it inspires the resolution of such crises. These are all tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is how we see it. I think we would say. I will also say that, while we will implore through our good forums and these such platforms, different government platforms such as, OIC has various agencies such as IOFS, Islamic Organization of Food Security. We have ICDT, the Trade and Development Body, Islamic Development Bank, and they're all doing their bits and pieces, but ultimately, the political will has to be there, most certainly. At the same time, Shahid, as you know, being a private sector person, there's a lot in today's world that can be also galvanized by the private sector itself. And I think there is indeed opportunities where companies that are like-minded, of similar values in Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, UAE, Saudi, Turkey, Nigeria, and we cover all these markets, and we see a lot of private sector momentum who can also collaborate and engage in solving this as well. So the momentum is both ways, both from the government sides as well as from the private sector side. Brother Ibrahim, how do you see it? A quick word from you on Crescent Food, because we didn't hear, I know the great work you do. How are you seeing Crescent Food? And how, one of the things that we admire about Crescent Food, for those of you who don't know, is the incredible integrity with which Mr. Ahmed Adam, the founder, has established Crescent Food, which is now available in all major national outlets in the United States. And we're really, really impressed by the as Sister Rosi said, the intention and the the focus on the quality of it and the perspective. So Ibrahim, if you can speak a little bit about Crescent Food's goals going forward.
Absolutely, Jazakallah khairan. There's a few points to touch on from kind of what Brother Shahid and Sister Rosi were saying. For Crescent, going back to the amana, the trust factor and what you do. I want to share a quick story. When the Ukraine war, when the entire war broke out, our feed and our poultry is 100% vegetarian fed with no antibiotics. So the way we have to raise our birds and the health precautions we have to take are a lot higher than most other big companies like Tyson. So one of the main ingredients we have is our soybean oil as part of our vegetable diet. So when the Ukraine war broke out, number one, there was a shortage and there was a significant cost increase. And if you know anything about chickens, all they eat is soybean and corn. So when the significant part increases, it becomes a big business decision. But at Crescent, we put that as faith first. While many companies, large companies like Tyson and JBS and others, they moved away from a all-natural vegetarian fed diet to putting in byproducts, to compromising on the oils and the ingredients. We stuck our ground. So we believe that in moments of crisis, although there are, many tests, we believe these tests from Allah Azza wa Jal, are only a test, and it's how we deal with them and how we handle them is how we come out of it. So, alhamdulillah, from that crisis, from COVID, from many other crises, we believe, values and principles don't change, opinions change, routes change, but the value system should not change. And I believe Muslims in general, no matter where they are, should not have to pay more for food just because it is halal. We do our part at Crescent, and that's really our work globally as we build our relationships and our partnerships is, we don't want because something is labeled halal for it to cost more and have a higher accessibility challenge. So at Crescent, at the work that we do, it is about, creating this halal ecosystem of increasing product availability, all while maintaining the level of faith and amana and the standards that we have in front of us.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I want to ask if from the attendees, if there are any questions. I see a couple of questions on the Q&A thing. As we wrap up, inshallah, soon. If there are any questions, please ask. One of the questions I just see there for our panelists is, and this may be a little bit of more of a detailed question, but particularly, Mr. Shahid, in context of UAE as a major food trade hub, now that with this Hormuz crisis and alternatives through Oman and Saudi Arabia being created, how do you see sort of, if we can speak a little bit operationally, this playing out vis-a-vis UAE's current status as a major food trade hub?
See, because of its proximity, the UAE has been able to source products through air freighting from India and Pakistan and other neighboring countries like Egypt. So a lot of stuff, so there's no shortage on the shelves at all. But I have seen, I like to do grocery shopping myself along with my wife because I want to keep an eye on what's happening, on the shelf, because that's what I call where the rubber meets the road. That's where you get the pulse of people, the products, the business, the food, and availability, visibility, and affordability. But I've seen affordability really go for a toss right now. A lot of vegetables which were commonplace are not easily available. So what they've done is a sensible thing. They are not bringing in niche products. They're bringing in big quantities of what sells like potatoes as opposed to that, white eggplant as opposed to the purple one, right? So they're not getting those small products. If you were keen on those, they are not available. And they are bringing in through air freights and also some small shipments through Oman. So, and then this whole pipeline, because luckily the Red Sea is still open. Yes, the Mandib, Babel Mandib. So Saudi hasn't been that affected. So that is one route that has been taken over. And then from Africa, a lot of stuff is coming through that route. So I'm glad there's no shortage of food whatsoever. Prices have gone up. And inshallah, now with this Strait of Hormuz opening, I see that all this will come down very fast, the pricing. And it'll come to normal levels because now, of course, the Hajj season is there and there's a lot of activity going on. And per capita income, again, is in the favor, So it's not such situation where prices go up, but people can't afford it at all. That is not the situation, alhamdulillah, in this region. So I think the governments have handled it well. And also the private enterprises handle it very well. So people like, the Lulus and Nestos of the world and Carrefour, all these guys are very well linked because they don't want their shelves empty. And I didn't see anything out of stock other than the examples I gave.
Great. So I think I want to be respectful. I know we're a few minutes over our time. I want to thank all of you, Mr. Shahid, Ms. Rosi, Mr. Ibrahim, for joining. It was really an honor. I think this was a great discussion, and there's a lot to discuss or to enable. Hopefully this conversation will be of value, and I will pass it on to my colleague Iman Ali too. give some reminders to the attendees now. Again, thank you from my side. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Brother Rafi, and our dear panelists, Shahid Khan, Ibrahim, Abed, and Rosi Osman, and of course to Brother Ibrahim, who earlier presented our key findings of today's brief. Thank you all for such a substantive and thought-provoking session. The key takeaway I will leave us all with is that the crisis is transmitting through two channels. Direct disruption, which is arriving in weeks, and the domino effects that will shape the coming few years. The 8 strategic options that were outlined in this brief are not just defensive moves, but they represent a genuine opportunity for OIC economies to convert this disruption into a structural advantage. The interactive dashboard and the link and the full brief is on the Zoom link, and you can see it on your screen shortly as well. You can see the barcode where you can access the dashboard. So please do explore it and share it widely. For any consulting engagements or advisory support, the team's contact details are on the final slide of the brief, and we can post our internal DS, our DS contact as well on the chat. So the third brief on finance and Islamic finance is coming soon. So stay tuned for the announcement, and we hope to see you in our next roundtable. Thank you all once again, and I wish you a very happy Eid. Inshallah, we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Inshallah. Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak, indeed, to everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.